You know how much a big blockbuster movie makes over the period of a summer? $400 million, if you're lucky. That's a big blockbuster. Grand Theft Auto 5, one of the most anticipated video games ever. First day of sales, $800 million in one day. A blockbuster movie makes half of that over the period of a summer. That's incredible. Obviously, talk of video games back in the news following what happened Monday in Washington Naval Yard shooting. Is there a link? Because this shooter and other shooters, these mass killings, often we find out they were gamers. They played video games. Is there a link? We're going to find out coming up on News Radio 1620. It's Pensacola right now. My name is Brandon. Welcome into the show. I want to bring in Dr. Wendy Rice, psychologist. She deals with this kind of stuff, talking about these violent video games. Dr. Rice, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Pretty good. Glad you could be here. So which came first, the chicken or the egg? We talk about these video games. The conversation again this week following the Naval Yard shooting on Monday. This dude was apparently a gamer. Is it people with a propensity towards violence gravitate towards these games, or people start playing these games and all of a sudden they become violent?
I think it's a big explosion of the two. I think if you have no interest in violence, you probably aren't going to be drawn toward violent video games. So these must strike some kind of a chord inside of people, and then the more you are bombarded with images of violence, the more that becomes like infiltrates your being in a sense.
So yeah, now and if we kind of combine everything, let's say we're talking movies, we're talking music videos, we're talking video games. If kids are bombarded by enough of this stuff, and let's start with a kid who's not having any other psychological problems. Does this truly, does it affect kids?
Probably if there aren't other underlying problems. The average kid knows right from wrong. The average kid knows you don't go get your dad's gun and shoot people. The average person knows right from wrong. When people go to war, they're exposed to tons of violence, and most of them don't come home and do damage to anybody. So the issue is that you get desensitized to the violence, and if you have a person with mental illness or a person with very poor coping skills, and they're living in this virtual world of violence, it can lead you down a dangerous path.
Our guest is Dr. Wendy Rice, RicePsychology.com. The other thing I want to ask, especially this new video game, Grand Theft Auto 5, sets a record for sales in the first 24 hours. And yeah, I guess, what are you hearing already, particularly about this game that's disturbing?
The disturbing piece about it is that there is a whole part where you as a player can torture a terrorist with wrenches and all sorts of other things that are reminiscent, I guess, of Dexter and Criminal Minds and Scandal, actual torture.
So let me ask you this. Let's say I'm on RicePsychology.com and you and I are doing a Skype call, and I've got a young child who has some issue with video games, and I'm saying, Dr. Rice, help me. How do I break this habit? What do you suggest?
I suggest you sit with your child or your young adult and you see what they're being exposed to, and then you consult your own common sense and say, is this okay, or is this very, very disturbing, number one, and everything in moderation. So if your kid's spending 10 hours a day playing, it's too much.
Right. So it is okay to play a little bit of these games. And again, here's my opinion. I'm not a psychologist, but my opinion is it comes back, a lot of it just comes back to good parenting.
Absolutely. I think that so much is about common sense, particularly if you have a perfectly adjusted kid.
The problem is common sense. Not all of us own some common sense. Now, you actually, in your practice, I find this kind of interesting. You use some video games as therapy. How do you do that?
The video games that we use clearly don't have violent content. They're driving games and memory games and games where you have to scan things very quickly, and we do it to systematically improve attention and memory and processing speed, because when you can keep more in mind and you're more focused, you're going to be a whole lot more efficient and perform better at work or at school.
Let's talk about the political aspect before we let you go. And somebody, on the heels of another mass shooting, and people want to start pointing fingers at violent video games. As a psychologist, where do you come down on that? Do you say, yes, we need to get rid of them, or you just say, Let them sell whatever games they want. It goes back to parenting. I mean, would you be for, eliminating games like this?
I'm a pacifist, for sure.
Okay.
I don't really get going hunting. I don't really get the deer goes out of its house in the morning to go forage and it comes back dead. I don't really get some of that stuff. My personal view is I don't like it, but I don't think that you want to dictate that for a society. So I think that when you're an adult, you can make the decisions you want to make, and before that, it's up to the parents to decide what they want their kids to be exposed to.
She is one of Florida's premier licensed psychologists. RicePsychology.com, where you can do Skype visits. Doctor, thanks for appreciate your input on the show tonight.